Hi, I'm Lionel, and welcome to the Three Cots podcast, where we discuss everything about retail and marketplace automation. Our mission is to provide you with the latest trends, insights, and game changing strategies that are essential for all businesses selling on marketplaces and in retail. Once again, we're joined by Ahmed Sanda, our head of insights at Three Cots. Ahmed is our expert in data and analytics, known for his ability to unravel complex marketplace dynamics and convert them into real, actionable, transformative strategies. So, in this episode, we're focusing on our 2024 search trends impacting Amazon sellers. Ahmed, can you introduce yourself and tell us what led you to conduct this report for the end of year?
Hi, Lionel. So thank you for the glorious introduction. I'm Ahmed Sanda, head of insights at Three Colts, and as Lionel mentioned, part of my role is unraveling data analytics trends and insights to try to give our partners, sellers, and vendors an upper hand in the e-commerce market. In terms of what led the study into 2024 trends, we thought the new year's time where a lot of sellers and vendors are going through inventory and sort of planning processes to the end of the year. And we thought it would be interesting to look at sort of what's changed over the past year and where our consumer interests heading as we start off at the top of the year.
Ahmed, your report on end of year sales and search trends provides a fascinating look into consumer behavior. Can you start by sharing the major shift you've noticed when it comes to the transition into 2024 on Amazon?
To assess sort of the sales and search trends, first stop for the data was Amazon Seller Central and looking at the search trends over a weekly period for the current year and the year prior. And interestingly, what we found was I think that there are three major takeaways. The first being there was a 21% year over year increase in digital video download searches, which was pretty interesting and partially we think that could be due to the coincidence of some like larger retail box stores minimizing their physical inventory. So, for example, here in the United States, Best Buy no longer stocks like physical media for like videos and video games, etc. Second major finding we found was at the start of the new year and towards the end of the year, self help books and kids' books were pretty popular. So, self help ranging from stuff like 48 Laws of Power or Atomic Habits to also religious guides such as like Study the Bible in 52 Weeks and the like. And then the third major trend that we found was that video game searches were converting at a 30% higher rate on average year over year. Obviously, there is some distinction between the different platforms and brands, but it was interesting that overall video game searches seem to be converting at a higher rate year over year.
So, Ahmed, there was a point that you made that was really interesting about people going online to buy their physical media because they can't seem to find it in store. Have we reached that stage in the world where it's easier to find physical media online than in store?
So I guess there's sort of two elements to that. One is larger retail like box stores are no longer stocking that physical media. So I guess for collectors and the like, they are going to be searching for physical media more online, and it's probably going to be like smaller third party vendors rather than like buying, let's say, your favorite movies from Target, Best Buy. Walmart and the like. I think the other element is that people are switching off of physical media completely and going to a more digital library. That's why we see a 21% increase in the digital video download searches. I think what was also interesting was even though there was an increase in searches, there wasn't necessarily a major change in the conversions. So it's just a sheer growth in interest in that market. And I thought it was interesting to call out.
So you've once again highlighted the 21% year-on-year increase in digital download searches.
Yeah.
What does this significant trend suggest about the future of digital content on Amazon and how can sellers adapt?
Yeah, I think this means that the audience is a lot more engaged in building their digital libraries. And for that reason, I think there are some benefits to sellers, right? Selling digital licenses no longer requires the um, logistical operations of the physical media. So there's an uptick in margins there. However, given that you're licensing digital content, there are other fees associated with that to the actual license holders. So there's a little change in economics there. But overall, I think this could be a positive to sellers as it saves space in their inventory and it reduces their logistical costs.
And I guess sellers are going to have to think about how they market their brand of selling these digital products to make sure that they stand out. This is a whole different game for Amazon sellers, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true as well. And I guess now the challenge is rather than competing with other individual, like smaller third party sellers, you may be competing with the actual license holder. So, say for example, Amazon Video versus let's say like there's like Movies Anywhere, like Windows Store, iTunes, etc. So there is going to be I guess a difference in marketing strategy to that, and ensuring that your searches come up high in that in the search trends.
So, with self help books and kids' books leading the charge in the new year, what strategies would you recommend for sellers in the books category, and how can they capitalize on this ever evolving world of readers' interests?
What this signifies is that there's a rise in the interest in reading and books towards the end of the year. So if I'm a seller, I'd be looking to launch books in that period, specifically if they're within the self-help and kids books categories. But even if they're not, just taking advantage of this rise in interest in reading. If you have, for example, copies of bestsellers that you really want to push, I think now is a great time for it. You could also consider things like bundling books with, say, gift cards, so that that way you're both providing a present and the opportunity for someone to purchase other items that they may like. I think it makes for good year-end gifts, and also for people who are into New Year's resolutions. A lot of times New Year's resolutions tend to be they want to read more, they want to disengage, and so I think this is a great time for sellers to be able to leverage those opportunities and be able to bring reading to their audience if that is the avenue in which they operate.
It's good to see that people are still reading and interested in reading year on year.
The reading has also become more digital. So, like a lot of the data that we assess, I didn't specifically stratify by digital download versus physical, but there is also that transition happening in that books period, and that is a research study we can undergo further, looking at what share of books are converting digitally versus physically, and I think that would also be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for sellers, they really need to know whether they need to be focusing on the digital sales, as you're saying, and licensing, or whether they can still be in the game, going out to the bookstores, finding secondhand books, if that reseller market is still going to be around in 3 to 5 years. So it's important for long term planning for our Amazon sellers. Another thing that we noticed with the books is that religious books are particularly on the rise. Is that in conjunction with kids' books, or is it just people with their New Year's resolution wanting to really read more religious text?
Yeah, and this was actually pretty interesting to me when I was uncovering the data. So I think, for example, in the year ending 2022 to 2023, there were maybe like one in three or like one in five of the top searched towards the end of the year were probably religious books. Whereas this year, 2023, 2024, we're seeing like two to three out of the top five being religious books in terms of just searches. And I thought that was a pretty interesting trend. I think it could signify that there are a lot more people looking to self enrich themselves spiritually, and it could also be just as it could also be a factor that the earning population, or the population that does have disposable income to spend on these items, is also growing, right? So I think of myself as, for example, like a 30-year old. I'm guessing that 30 to 40-year old bracket might also be stepping deeper into their religious roots to try to get some sort of self fulfillment. But that's definitely something we can also research further. But it was definitely interesting to see the proliferation of religious text in search trends.
So moving on to a personal favorite topic of mine, video games. It's interesting to see that the video game searches and conversions as well have seen an increase of 30% year on year. That's just mind bending. Are these particularly when it comes to game consoles? How do we make sense of this?
Yeah, so in this, I was specifically looking at game consoles and console related media. So, software for those gaming consoles, so actual games. I think what's really interesting is the conversion rates going up 30% year over year, as well as the searches rising in general. I think, except for the Nintendo Switch, which sort of makes sense because that's towards the end of its life cycle, versus things like the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S that are in like their mid cycle, and now their software is coming into maturation. So you have a lot more content. And then also looking at some of the sales trends over like the past quarter, we see that there were significant discounts on bundling opportunities. So, for example, the PlayStation 5 Spider Man 2 bundle, there were a lot of Xbox and Xbox Series S discounts and promotions. So, definitely getting a lot more of their user base into this newer ecosystem. It's also particularly interesting to see that virtual reality had a significant uptick in interest, and that's most likely due to the release of the Oculus Quest, or the Meta Quest 3. And I think, like, we see that when gaming consoles launch, if there is content available for them, they do tend to sell. Now, I think the more, like we mentioned, the most interesting part is the fact that they're converting at a higher rate. So that means that it's likely that the software is getting better. So there are more interesting games that people are more interested in, or people have slightly more disposable income. So they're spending that on their hobbies, and gaming is a general hobby that has grown over time. And I think also what's interesting in this is we're looking specifically at like video game consoles, not necessarily considering like the mobile aspect. And mobile gaming is huge in most parts of the world. So I think as a whole, the gaming industry is like ripe, and there's a lot of good sales and revenue to be made in that sector.
So what stands out to me when it comes to gaming is the ancillary aspects of gaming. So for example, at the end of the year, GTA 6 was announced, and I wonder what effect that had when it comes to people going online to search for their favorite games, to be reminded about their games. Maybe people who haven't picked up a game for a few years or even a few months are now thinking, okay, let me get back into gaming. Let me see when these releases, because it kind of snowballs. That you get that snowball effect when it comes to an interest. So it may not always just be because they're interested in a specific game or because of a new console's launching, but it could be because of other things happening. Even looking at the virtual reality searches, with what Apple's doing with the Vision Pro, it's definitely going to have an effect on how people view virtual reality altogether. If Apple's stepping into the game, then it looks like something that we can bank on a little bit more rather than just a fad that we're not still sure whether it's going to be here to stay.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. So I think like recently, I think Apple announced that I think they've sold about 200,000 copies of the Apple Vision Pro, even at that steep price point, which sort of indicates the interest in that form of media. So, definitely with you. I think that. Apple stepping into the game definitely lends credibility to that VR space, saying that like it's here to stay. I think another interesting point that you made about sort of the snowball effect and like one piece of gaming content in GTA 6, for example, which was like breaking records for like YouTube views. I think it hit like 100 million in like under 2 days. There is that snowball effect that could rekindle a person's love for not necessarily the game that's being advertised, but other things that provide that similar feeling. So yeah, it's definitely a huge aspect. And also, I think one other thing that's interesting is the digital transition. We also see that happen in video games, where like now I think it's about on average 70% of video games worldwide are sold digitally. So I think the rise of gaming interest, and as we're also seeing the digital transition, I think they sort of play hand in hand. And for example, like I know for myself, like my gaming console is also like my home media console, right? So if I do have media, I tend to go digital on it because it's more easily accessible on my gaming console at home. So yeah, I think these are all factors that interplay and would affect sales search trends going forward.
And I think another thing that people have to consider is the rise as we move into digital video games and we're losing out on the physical media. There's going to be a significant rise in solid state hard drives that are beyond 2 terabytes. Because the PS5 itself, what's the max that you can get on that? You can put about 5, 6 games on that. If they're running in 4K 60 FPS, your storage is going to be done by the time you have a few games. So Amazon sellers may need to look at those trends for the next few years and start thinking about how can I invest in um, getting these physical solid state hard drives that are as small as possible that people can just plug into their consoles and use it to expand their space.
Yeah, that's definitely an avenue of interest as well, and that would probably be that's like under the accessories pillar of like video games. So like in addition to like controllers, solid state hard drives, external storage, yeah, and like as we mentioned, as people grow their digital libraries, I know like there are some people that love to have everything always like downloaded and readily accessible, right? So they just keep buying hard drives, and those are segments of the population that sellers can look to market to. Definitely.
So, looking at the power of data when it comes to Amazon Seller Central, could you explain how sellers can leverage Amazon Seller Central's search term report to refine their strategies and better meet consumer demands?
A lot of times, our going theory is past behavior is the greatest predictor of future behaviors. So, using Amazon Seller Central data, I think sellers can leverage that by segmenting that search data to what's relevant for them. So, let's say I am a retailer of in this case, let's say digital videos, right? So I can get that Amazon search term trend data. I can look at the digital video download category and I can see what are the most frequently searched movies, which ranks higher. I can see the conversion rates for all of these different movies and build my inventory that way. So rather than going with a sort of scattershot approach that I'm going to buy a bunch of digital licenses for a wide swath of movies, you can look and see what types of movies tend to trend in the periods in which you're selling, and then you can build your inventory that way. um, Definitely takes some data expertise, some chops. You're going to have to do some filtering and try to understand the data a little bit better, but I think it's a powerful tool for sellers to leverage.
We come into it with our three course insights and the amazing work that you're doing. That's where sellers can go onto the three course blog and look at the reports that you've created, which really take a deep dive into the search trends, into data. So it's not all dependent on their skills alone, but we're providing a world that makes things easier for them as well.
And that's definitely the hope. And as we continue to work on these podcasts, we're interacting with the community. We'd love to hear from them, and we love to know what's on their minds, what they think would be interesting to research, and we hope to keep that dialogue going.
So, in your analysis, you mentioned the fluctuations in categories like apparel and home. Can sellers learn from these patterns and how can they adjust their inventory and marketing strategies accordingly?
I think in terms of that, what I was looking at was just overall changes in search trend volume. And so I think, for example, what was found was for things like apparel and clothing, uh, the peak search period was the week of Christmas, and then it tapers off after that. And I'm guessing part of the reason for that is people get clothes, jackets, etc. as Christmas gifts, and so they're not necessarily as interested in them immediately after that, which is why we see the trends switch into things like entertainment, video games, books, etc. So I think as a seller, if I'm building out my inventory, right, if I know how much I'm estimated to sell by Christmas and to say like apparel, I try to make sure that I'm getting to that inventory level and not significantly overstocking to make space for things like books, etc., which are going to sell better in the weeks after. And obviously, we know inventory management is a whole different science, right? It takes a lot more planning and sort of considerations than this. But I think in general, we get the gist that there are these categories that move up and down, and so we should plan our inventory along with those cycles to ensure that we have space for the items that people want at different times in the year.
So, in this report, you're focusing on trends. And as we know, these trends don't just start in the marketplaces, oftentimes they start on social media.
Yeah.
So, with rising interest in products like rosemary oil, something that I've used myself, and sustained popularity of books like 48 Laws of Power, seeing those two items, I can straight away tell you those are trending topics on TikTok. So, with these emerging trends, what kind of insight can sellers take from these kind of trends and the places they're coming from?
I'll deal with the two examples separately. So rosemary oil, I too be using that. It definitely makes the hair smell good, and it helps get the hair growth in the early part of the year. And I'm here in New York, so it's cold out here, and having some protection on the head helps. I think what we're seeing in these sections are there's a rise in interest in self care and specifically more natural remedies for self care. So if I'm a seller and I'm on TikTok and I see the trends of natural hair supplements and some of these more organic solutions, I'm going to invest in stocking up some of these more natural solutions. So rosemary oil. I grew up in West Africa, so like we use like neem oil, baobab oil. There's all those types of products that are similar to rosemary oil that can be marketed in a similar vein. And with regards to books like 48 Laws of Power, as we mentioned, the new year is a time where people are trying to tap into New Year's resolutions. They're trying to better themselves. They're planning for the rest of the year, setting up goals, etc. And so I think with that, it's up to sellers to find the books that are trending best at that point in time and ensure that they have stock of that. And with books, it might be a little more difficult, right? Because it might be like a phrase from a book or so that's trending, and then identifying where that phrase comes from and bringing awareness to the public could also be a good actionable strategy. Definitely.
So, looking at the big picture from everything you've shared with us, to wrap up, what are your top recommendations for sellers to plan their marketing in 2024 and essentially just to consider the dynamic when it comes to consumer behaviors?
Around the new year, shoppers are a little more selective. They've gotten their swath of gifts. They have like kitchen items and stuff that was gifted to them by family. And so I think like what tends to pique people's interest more is self fulfillment and entertainment. Right. And so organizing your inventory to align with these interests and trends could be beneficial to you in ramping up your sales in the early part of the year. I think the other major takeaway is we're in the midst of a digital content surge. Like if you don't have a means to sell digital products, you should. Um, be that video games, be that movies, be that ebooks. These are all avenues in which we're seeing transitions, and it's in the seller's best interest to be well positioned to take advantage of that. And I think the final major trend is like gaming is the predominant form of media now. And if you're into like selling any sort of media item and you're not in gaming, this is the time to get in. And as we're seeing, the conversion rates for the gaming sector are amping higher and higher. And given that there's three major consoles in PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, Microsoft Series X, sellers can either choose to like find their niche within one of them or be generalist across those. And I think those are the three major takeaways we want our sellers to have. And we think that starting the year off with these three pillars could be beneficial to sellers.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for sharing these insights into the end of year sales and search trends that will impact Amazon sellers in 2024. It's clear to understand that it's important to adapt and shift according to consumer behaviors. I love what you shared with us about digital sales and the rise year on year. And knowing that sellers need to focus on this going forward is going to be crucial for their success in the coming years. Thanks again to everyone for joining us on another episode of the Three Cults podcast. And we'll be back here giving you more insights about how to grow your business on all marketplaces and in retail.